Hi, I'm Chrissy.
And I'm Jess, and this is Financial Progress.
Welcome, everyone. Before we begin, I just want to say a little disclaimer. This is just a conversation between friends. This is not financial advice. And please seek the help of a financial advisor before making any financial decisions.
Yes,
So, welcome, everyone.
yeah, today we have a special guest. I'm so excited. We have Rahkim today, who is a financial therapist and counselor. You don't understand how excited I am because I love talking money and emotions, and I feel like it's so important today, right? In today's society. So, before we get into money and emotions, I wanted you to share a bit about your financial progress over the years.
Yeah, so I think, super appropriate to talk about both at the same time, right? Because one impacts the other. I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York, which is in Westchester County, right outside of the Bronx, actually. You could consider my family's kind of economic class at that particular point in time as being kind of lower middle class to, bordering on the line of poverty. And occasionally going on across that line, right? So we did not talk about money in the house.
Mhm.
There was a lot learned through osmosis, through observations, and unfortunately slash fortunately through just being thrown into the environment of helping my mom kind of make financial administration decisions. Right, so we had food stamps, we had Section 8. There was a lot that kind of shaped my perspective on what I would do as an adult when it came time to managing my own finances. Fast forward, I'm 21 years old. I'm entering the banking industry for the first time, and I'm like, wow, there's so much out there that I didn't know. Whether it be financial products and services, whether it be financial strategies, interacting with clients on that wealth spectrum, people who were experiencing poverty, people who were experiencing significant wealth, and having to have the financial business acumen to talk to them all intelligently, right? So um, on the job really helps me to learn kind of foundational information around product services and strategy when it comes to managing money that I would then take home, apply to my own financial circumstances, and certainly share with friends, family, and community. Some financial highlights for me were definitely the biggest financial highlight for me, especially in today's economy, is buying a home at 26 years old. So I was 26 in 2016. I bought a house, bought a multifamily duplex for 165, and that was a game
A
changer
multiplex,
for
you
me.
said?
A two family, yeah,
A
just one.
super, okay.
But yeah, so I bought a duplex and didn't know anything about owning a home. Grew up in an environment where I was aspiring to get an apartment.
Mhm.
So this was a big game changer for me personally, but also for my family. I can trace, I want to say about 5 or 6 house purchases from the decision that I made to purchase a home back in 2016. So there's a lot of pride associated with that. And of course, in today's market, it's almost impossible for millennials to buy a home. So I thank the 26-year-old version of myself often, like, man, I'm glad you made that decision.
Mhm.
But as we talk about, or as we transition into talking about money and emotions, financial therapy, financial trauma, that decision was made through a space of financial trauma, right? Past financial trauma. And so I didn't have the vocabulary or the language to really describe that at that particular
Right.
point in time, or even immediately afterwards. It wasn't until very recently that I got into this world of financial therapy that I really understood how some of those early experiences as a child influenced that decision, and
Mhm.
ultimately the vigilance that I had experienced when it came to managing my own finances that led to me making that decision. So yeah, we can. If there's any other questions that you guys have, I'm happy to answer them. But outside of that, we can definitely jump into it.
Oh, yeah. We have a lot of questions. Um, so for our audience, can you, I guess, help them understand what specifically is financial trauma and how would it affect them?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot, and there are a lot of definitions of financial trauma in circulation. Usually, I like to frame financial trauma through two lenses. The first lens is probably a more accepted lens, and that's the clinical lens. that speaks to prolonged financial stress due to a variety of inputs, right? So that could be experiencing poverty, that could be experiencing a job loss, that could be having a lot of debt. Usually, what I find about the clinical approach to defining financial trauma is that it focuses on a first person experience, right? So you are the individual experiencing trauma because this happens to you. I use a more culturally informed definition. And so my definition of financial trauma is any instance, observed, or experience that has a negative impact on the way that you view, interact with, and believe about one. And so really the focus there is on the observation of somebody else's trauma and the internalization of what that looks like, right? You don't have to be a person um, like impact from that trauma to be affected by it. I talk a lot in that lens about generational trauma and some of the passing down of trauma through previous generations. So your grandparents experience what we would call financial trauma through a clinical lens, and they decide, I don't want to work with banks, I don't want to use credit cards, I don't want to save, I don't want to invest, and that behavior is then passed down to your parents, which is then passed down to you. Well, you're experiencing financial trauma because even without having, experienced it directly. So that cultural lens, I think, is super important, and it's a differentiator when we're talking to audiences of color, particularly Black and Latinos, because there's so much within the way that we navigate culturally that I think kind of comes up against conventional views of money management, right?
Mhm.
When we talk about the unbanked, underbanked community, we start to kind of assess the reasons why that is. Most people would approach that through a lens of, well, you need to put more financial education out there. And I don't disagree that financial education is important, but I would argue that there are some very financially educated poor people, and that poverty is a result of some of capitalism at the root, right? But some of the systemic structures that exclude people of color, where certainly it's not impossible for us to realize some success financially, but it is a different kind of maneuvering that has to take place in order to do so. And in the process of learning how to maneuver in that way, we may be experiencing even greater trauma that we will then in turn pass down unintentionally.
That's a lot of information, but good information and absolutely right. Especially because we, Chrissy and I came from like low income neighborhoods, so we kind of experienced what our parents went through and our generations before that. In what ways do you think that financial trauma can impact like our decision making or our relationship with money?
Yeah, great question. So there are several, but there are two that I really want to focus on. What I've seen through research and through my observation and practice is that, particularly within millennial and minority community, so we're talking about those lines of intersection, there is either an avoidant response that says, I'm not going to look at it, I'm not going to deal with it, right? I'm not checking my bank account balances, I'm not looking at my credit score, I'm not opening the letters in the mail. Or there's a vigilant approach, right? So that vigilant looks like, I'm going to do everything that I need to do to get out of this situation, even if that is extreme savings or extreme investing, or I'm going to use the word robbing myself of the experience of experiencing money, right? We're not using money as a tool now, we're elevating money to this place on a pedestal that says, I need to have it so that I can feel safe, so that I can feel secure, so that I can feel powerful, so that I can feel worthy. And so the vigilance side of it, I think on the surface, appears to be positive for many people because you're doing all the right things, right? You're investing, you're saving, you're budgeting, you know how much money's in your account, you're monitoring your credit. But internally, is it making you happy? Are you using it to create the life that you want for yourself, for your family? and what are the sacrifices that you might be making from a mental health perspective, from a physical health perspective, right? Some people are working 2 and 3 jobs, 80 hours a week, 160 hours a week, right? Because they feel like they have to. I've seen, even during the pandemic and up until recently, some people have managed to get away with working 2 or more full-time remote jobs because they figured out, oh, this is the life hack, right? And companies were catching on. As a result, they were being fired from both jobs. But I mean, if you think about the emotional and physical toll of working one 40-hour job and having to ping pong between two, so that you can make, whatever. Let's say they're both jobs are paying $100,000 a year. What is the impact of that on the in the long term on your physical and your mental health? And why do you feel like you have to be in a position to do that, right? I think we can tie that into some aspects of money vigilance as a means to kind of calm down our nervous system from a reaction to capitalism. I've brought up capitalism twice in this conversation. I just want to qualify, when people hear that, particularly people whose peoples have been exploited by the capitalistic system, a lot of times there's a violent reaction. But there are people who have experienced some material success financially, and they applaud and uphold capitalist systems. It says, hey, you have to become the business owner, right? You have to become the business class so that you can benefit. I will say at this stage in my process that I'm not a full-on socialist or full-on, communist in terms of, economic positioning. That I think that there are at this stage ways to practice capitalism in a socially conscious, socially responsible way. But I do also recognize that the foundation of capitalism and the way that it's practiced and the way that it has been practiced in the West and around the world has been highly exploitative of indigenous peoples and people of color. And when I talk about, Black Americans specifically, and the foundation of this country being built on slavery, I have to acknowledge that those times have an impact, not only on people back then, but on people today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So in our community where we grew up, investing wasn't even talked about. Like a lot of people don't know what investing is and what a 401k actually does and what it's used for. Never heard of Roth IRAs or anything like that in our community. And it wasn't until we learned in our 30s what that was. So growing up, we had no idea what that was, and I feel like that's very common in low-income communities, and it's not talked about or discussed, or even your parents don't necessarily know what it is either. And I've noticed, like with my parents, they were constantly like cashing out their pensions when they switched jobs, and they never built up any type of emergency savings or any type of retirement plan because they didn't have the knowledge of that compound interest that it could build up to in the future, didn't even realize it. So I can understand what you're saying about like the impact it has on the community, and not even knowing what it is necessarily, like what financial education is, or even having the means to put extra money away to do it. And I can see how people feel they need to work 2 jobs or more in order to make ends meet because they're not making what they should be making. So it's
Right. I mean,
difficult.
so many intersecting points, right? When we talk about that, through a lens of the wage gap, and what the wealth gap looks like across our communities. But also, I think what's even more heartbreaking is when people do know, like they do know that they should be investing, and they do understand compounding, and they do understand, you know, this runway that they could take advantage of. But then the constant interruptions in what that runway looks like, right? So I don't think anybody ever really wants to pull from their retirement accounts because they know that it's for retirement. But sometimes circumstances then force your hand, and you're like, well, I have this money, I'm gonna, I need to deal with it right now. There's also life expectancy as a factor, right? And not from a biological perspective, but really from like a war zone perspective, right? A lot of people within Black and brown communities navigate physical environments where, as youth, they may not feel like they'll reach 30 or 50 or 60, right? And so if I don't think that I'm going to live that long, why am I going to plan to live that long financially? And so there's mindset there that kind of influences not just financial trauma, but like the trauma of growing up in the hood, right? And certainly that's not everybody's story. But I think that those variables are also important when we talk about the numbers and the statistics that we see around what adoption looks like in using some of these products or staying the course with some of these products, or what is the reason why people are pulling from some of these products. It's not just as simple as a lack of education in all instances. So yeah, and I think that you bring up some really good points, and certainly points that people will resonate with when it comes to looking at expecting their own process and even what's happening with their family.
Jess and I, we just had a conversation earlier about PA minimum wage and how when we were growing up, it was like $5.15 and then like
5:15.
$5.25, $5.35, and then it stayed at $7.25 for years, and like
And it's
it's
still
still
there.
$7.25 after so many years, and we're like, what in the world? Like how was $7.25 okay 10 years ago, and then it's still okay now for minimum wage in PA? So it's just like, I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but yeah, sorry. I don't want to digress too much from the topic, but yeah.
I think they're all like, all of this matters, right? All of this is relative to the conversation, because my observation has been that when it comes to these discussions around money and money and community, a lot of times the approach is a very sanitized, very privileged approach that says everybody is starting at the same starting point. Everybody has access to the same opportunity, right? And through one lens, that could be true. But through another lens, when you add in all of those variables, it's like, hold on a second, this paint is very different. And I think that those variables matter, not from a position of victimizing people, but from a position of empowering people to recognize these obstacles are in front of you. And now that you recognize that these obstacles are in front of you, what are the things that we can do collectively and individually to navigate those obstacles? What are the cheat codes that we can share with our friends, with our family, that says, yeah, we're going to run into this issue, but this is how I've overcome that. And it's not going to always look the same for everybody, right? I could tell the story of buying a house at 26 years old, but the market was very different in 2016 than it was right now. So I can't tell people follow this same playbook because the playbook has changed.
Correct.
But I think the more that we talk about, these things that exist on the outside of the arithmetic of money management, the more that these conversations will become normalized, and the more that we can do from a social justice lens, from a community lens, from combating the dominant status quo lens, to say, hey, we're all operating and navigating very different worlds and varying degrees of privilege, and that's not something to be ashamed of, or that's not something to try to be quiet about. That's something to amplify and to be proud of.
That was great. Talking about shame, how can a person manage the feelings of shame or guilt related to like financial mistakes?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think my shameless plug is that they should go and work with a financial counselor or a financial therapist, right? But I don't think,
100%,
yeah.
100%. That's not.
It's not shameless. It's needed. It's
No.
necessary sometimes. Yeah.
But I don't think that's the only answer, right? I think, as we start to learn and develop the vocabulary to describe what it is that we're feeling and what it is that's causing us to feel the way that we feel. That socializing that among our friends and our family. And maybe it's not everybody, right? Because everybody's not going to be supportive. Everybody's not going to understand.
Yeah.
So let me take a step back and say socializing that among a curated list of friends and family who will be there to support you, who will be there to encourage you and say, hey, you know what? I understand, it's okay, right? Because I think sometimes the shame that we carry is internal based off of what our perception of other people's
Mm-hmm.
perception of us will be. And as long as we're not having the conversation with the people that we perceive to perceive us a different way, we're going to continue to operate in that mindset. But maybe the perception that we have of somebody else's perception is completely off, right? Especially if you are somebody who is first gen in education, first gen in high income employment, first gen in entrepreneurship. There are going to be challenges and obstacles that you navigate that maybe other people in your surrounding circle have never even thought of, have never even had exposure to. And so, how can they understand what you're going through if they've not been through what you've been through, right?
Right.
So I think the first step to addressing shame in some of the financial decisions that people make are definitely socializing it. Like, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I felt like I had to do in this moment. Where I think the professional comes in is helping you to create a plan to get out of whatever that spiral is, right? So if you have shame around debt and you don't identify or you can't identify what is the reason why I'm overspending on funds that I don't have access to, or rather that I have access to but that are not mine, right? How do I break this pattern of overspending? What am I trying to solve for? Why do I feel like I need to continuously consume? A financial therapist or a financial counselor might be able to, certainly will be able to help you kind of understand those feelings and then craft a way to get out of it. But if you have a financial education and you kind of pinpoint, well, when I get stressed out, I'm going to Chick-fil-A or I'm going to buy a bottle of wine or I'm going to go gamble. Maybe I can replace that reward. Um, that's what we're doing. We're rewarding ourselves as a coping mechanism with something that's more beneficial. Maybe I can have more intentional money days with myself or with other people where I can review what my spending looks like. Because again, I'm seeing a lot of people move into that avoidant territory where it's like I'm gonna spend, but I'm not looking at my bank account, or they move into that vigilance space, which I think is less talked about because on the surface it looks good, but it really can be doing harm internally. So you might want to, we talk about keeping up with the Joneses. That can be a side effect of some of the shame that we have, right? Like I don't want people to know that I'm struggling, so I'm gonna buy this or I'm gonna use this service. And I've been fortunate as a financial therapist and as a person to be surrounded with other financial therapists who are very authentic and transparent in sharing what some of the struggles of their journey has looked like, which in turn has prompted me to share with them some of the struggles of what my journey has looked like. And we all come to the same conclusion, right? We're all human beings experiencing kind of the same lay of the land when it comes to this culture of consumerism and feeling like we have to have whatever this item is or whatever this experience is to be worthy of respect and admiration and love and all of the things, right?
So Jess and I recorded an episode about grief spending. Do you see any correlation between like grief and spending habits?
Yeah, I think, all of these kind of emotional responses are tied into kind of the same process, right? So if we look at nervous system regulation, I think it's huge when it comes to understanding our behaviors with money. There is a stimulus and then there is kind of like a reward, right? So whether that is grief, whether that is anxiety, whether that is shame or guilt, there are a couple other ones there, right? Like stress. We're experiencing like this fight or like kind of response from a nervous system that says, "Oh, I'm overly stimulated. So what can I do to calm down my stimulation? I'm going to go and we live in a culture that prioritizes, right? Whether that looks like going out for happy hour, whether that looks like stopping at Starbucks with coffee in the morning, whether that looks like buying a new outfit or buying a gadget.
For me, it's vacationing.
Vacationing, right? Um, and it's compounded because when we pick up our phone, we're also bombarded by advertisements a lot of times based off of things that we have either recently searched or, some people think that the phones are listening to you, based off of things that we were having conversations about. And so it's kind of like in your face, I don't want to say the most natural, but the most likely response to constantly seeing this thing that says buy, spend, 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 in terms of ad targeting based off of our behaviors, based off of our interests, based off of our demographic. How can we not fall into this pattern of trying to calm down our nervous system by spending? Right. So money, I wrote an article for my Substack recently, and I said that creation is the question that money answers. Right. And so basically the idea behind the article is that we're so conditioned to consume that it's almost like we're discouraged from creating. Right. And so in the process of navigating this culture of consumerism, where we're not taking time to sit down and decide where we want to pour our creative energy, we are spending money, right? We're answering the call of what somebody else has created. And whether that somebody else looks like Jeff Bezos with Amazon or Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook and Instagram or whoever else, we're spending money on somebody else's creation instead of spending time creating for ourselves. And so, I know I said a lot there, but just kind of boil it down. Nervous system regulation, which can often be combated or aided by mindfulness activities like meditation, like affirmation, like journaling, bringing ourselves back into the present moment and reminding ourselves of what is important to us as a whole, right? As an individual, but also what is important to us in this moment. And then also kind of rejecting the shame and the guilt that comes with it. I have to say very transparently that as I sit as an authority and a professional that deals with people who are dealing with these things, I also, as a human being, deal with these things on my own, right? And so there's no amount of education that makes you immune to the conditioning that we all are navigating. When, like I said, we pick up our phone or we watch TV or we go outside or on the internet, right? Like we're constantly being told, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not attractive enough unless you buy, spend. And that's something that we can come back, but we have to be intentional about.
I wanted to ask, I guess, a question coming from me because I love coaching people. And hopefully one day, financial therapist, I'm saying in front of y'all so y'all can hold me accountable, right? So when I coach people and I try to tell them the things that they should be working on or doing and realize that I guess they don't really care too much about it and they're not doing it, like, how do you personally handle those situations or feel about those situations? Because sometimes I get frustrated and then
I have been there. And this is a huge shout out to the AFCP and the Financial Therapy Association, because your job as a coach, as a counselor, as a therapist is not to tell people what they should be doing.
mm-hmm.
Because in that lens, you're setting yourself up for frustration because if they don't do it, then what happens, right? You get disappointed. Your job is to help people recognize what their goals are or establish goals in line with what their values are. And a lot of times, what coaches or financial advisors, sometimes financial planners might do is say, I'm the authority, I'm the professional, and this is what you need to do based off of what my education and my experience important.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, many times, when we take that approach to those service interactions, if those goals are not aligned to what that individual's values are, they'll never stick. They can be bought in from a rational perspective, but the irrational aspects of their being are going to surface, right? And so when they then come back to you and they say, "Hey, sorry, I didn't do the thing that you told me to do," or worse, they ghost you because they're like, "Damn, like I don't even want to face this person because I didn't do what they told me to do." It's important for us to acknowledge that there's resistance, and so why is there resistance? How do we then, as a professional, help to remove or decrease that resistance in our interaction with our client? And that goes back into the exercise around the values and goals. If you tell me this is what your goal is, but your behavior or your bank account transaction history is demonstrating to me that your values exist more so along the lines of going to Sunday brunches, going out to party at the club, going to spend money on whatever. When you're telling me you want to build an emergency fund, well, maybe we need to readjust what the goals look like so that they are more aligned with your values. Or maybe you need to redefine what your values are, right? And that's hard for a lot of people because
Mm-hmm.
many times the values that we carry have been instilled in us from a very young age, right? We have the influence of religion. We have the influence of our family structure. We have cultural influences. We have workplace influences. We have social media influence, right? And so you're just one person spending, however long your session is, whether that's 30 minutes, an hour, 45, whatever, and meeting with them on whatever the cadence is, 99% of the time, they may be experiencing something that's contrary to the messaging that you're providing. How can you win if they're not aligned with the messaging that you're delivering? And so a lot of times with working with individuals, one of the early activities that I will do is help them to take inventory or audit what are their values and their goals. Like write it down from
Mm-hmm.
your mouth. Tell me what's important to you. And then we can kind of. I'm not holding you accountable from the position of, you were a bad boy or you're a bad girl because you didn't meet your goals. I'm saying, hey, look, this is what you told me, right? So
Right.
what's happening? And then you can support the individual through the exploration or discovery process in, well, wait a second, why am I not sticking to these goals? Like, why am I prioritizing whatever this thing is? And is there a way for us to adjust the goals so that
Mm-hmm.
we can check off the box of what's important to us and still work towards the accomplishment? And I think that's the goal um, for a lot of us, right? It's a win-win situation.
Mm-hmm.
I get to have a bucket where, I put money aside so that I can go enjoy my Sunday brunch, but I also get to have a bucket where I can put money aside for my emergency fund or retirement savings or whatever that is.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
So, how can we start rebuilding a positive relationship with money after experiencing financial trauma?
Yes, great question. So I think, and it's not a popular thought or an encouraging one, but I think that, you can't erase trauma, right? You can acknowledge that it occurred and you can acknowledge your response to it, but it happened, right? You can't go in the past and undo it. And so I think that, you know, all of what we've talked about today are variables in helping us to reframe what is your reaction to that traumatic experience. And maybe in the process of healing from one financial trauma, you will unearth another financial trauma because often these are complex experiences, right? So to use a personal example, I shared with you guys that I navigated a poverty environment, right? There were times where I came home and there were eviction notices on the door. We didn't have any hot water, or we didn't have any electricity, or I go to the grocery store and I empty a cart of groceries on the conveyor belt, and then the food stamp card declined, right? These are all very embarrassing, shameful, traumatic experiences, especially as a child. But then you fast forward, and I tell you in the same breath, well, I decided to own my house at 26 years old. Was that a victory or was that a trauma response? At one point in time, I viewed it as a victory, right? I'm like, oh, I overcame these obstacles and now I am the landlord, right? I'm not going to get the eviction notice. I'm going to be the one putting the eviction notice on the door if that ever happens, right? But I also recognize that maybe I made that decision from a place of trauma that said, I don't want to be at the mercy of somebody else's decision to evict, right? I want to have something that I can call my own because I didn't have something to call my own growing up. That's not to diminish the accomplishment associated with owning a home, but it's also to be mindful of the fact that maybe during that period of time in my life, I was so vigilant about making it happen so soon because I didn't have when I was growing up. And so, again, not a bad thing, just an awareness thing, right? Mm-hmm. How has my experiences with money as a child informed maybe a more vigilant approach to how I manage my money in my 20s? How does that experience in my 20s inform maybe a more relaxed approach to how I manage my money in my 30s, right? Our values shift with our experiences, with our income, with our obligations, right? What is acceptable for me as a single man with no kids and a dog may look very different as a married man with children, right? And so I think it's super important to constantly audit what are those values and what are those goals so that you can, as best as you can, be aligned in the process of kind of combating, some of those variables that I said show up. I think also it's important to educate yourself, right? It's not just as simple as going to work with a financial professional. There's a million different types of financial professionals out there, right? So I think people, when they decide, hey, you know what, I just want to get my stuff together, I'm going to hire a financial advisor. Well, anybody can call themselves a financial advisor, right? What kind of financial professional are you looking for? And what kind of financial professional is appropriate? Because some CFPs, right, which are a lot of times viewed as the gold standard of financial professionals, won't see clients who don't make in excess of a certain income level or have in excess of a certain amount of assets. But these individuals who are seeking out CFPs maybe need to work with the AMC as an example, or maybe they need to work with a CPA or EA, right? It depends on where you are in your journey and what you're looking to accomplish. But I also think on the other side of working with professionals, which I highly encourage, that it's irresponsible to defer your financial well-being to somebody who sat and studied so that they can give you guidance or advice. Because some quote-unquote financial advisors are salespeople. And so their job is going to be to offer you a product that they're going to make a commission off of. Yeah, it might benefit you in the long run, or it might not. But it's absolutely going to benefit them, right? And so one of the things that I'm very proud of being an AFC and a candidate for the CFT1 is that there is a fiduciary standard that prioritizes the benefit of the individual that we're working with over, personal gain. And I think that, as a consumer and as somebody who provides education and information, that one of the things that I always encourage is that people own their journey. And part of owning their journey includes the educational, right? You want to be informed in some of the decision, in all of the decision making, but certainly in some of the aspects of decision making that you have control over.
Thank you. How can someone assess their progress in healing from any financial trauma over time?
Oh yeah, this is a good one too. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is journaling. And I feel like that's a very cliche answer, but
I love journaling.
Yeah, how else can we track like what progress looks like? Fortunately for me, I've had a very public facing personal brand since I want to say 2019, 2020. So a lot of the quote unquote journaling around my perspectives on money exists in the archives of like podcast interviews, right? I think my first podcast interview was in 2019. If I go back to listen, to the way that I talk about money or the ideas that I had at that stage, and kind of listen to the evolution of that thought form over
Mm-hmm.
the last 5 years. There's there's certainly growth there. There's growth in the confidence and the authority of my delivery. There's growth in some of the ideas. There's growth in the vocabulary that I use, right? Because there was a period of time where I didn't know what financial trauma was. I didn't know that financial therapy
Mm-hmm.
existed. Now I can use some more academic kind of vocabulary to describe some of these experiences. And I don't think that that's a prerequisite for everybody, right? Everybody doesn't have to go and study all of these things. But I think the documentation of what your thought process is and the assessment of how you're moving with money is very telling, right? You can look at your bank statements, you can look at the journal entries that you do, you can look at what you prioritize. I worked with a client recently who said that they are a reformed overspender, and they told me that some of the contributing factors to that included reading Ramit's book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, and some other financial education books. And I had to applaud them and say, hey, that's great. Like, you recognize that there was a pattern that wasn't serving you. You got some education, you changed that. Like, that's progress. And sometimes we need somebody to kind of be a cheerleader for us or pat us on the back. Like, financial coaches do a great job of that. Financial counselors and therapists do a great job of that. Financial planners can certainly help with that. And I also want to qualify a statement I made previously. I did say most financial planners, CFP planners, work with high-end, high-net-worth individuals, but there are pro bono financial planners out there. I just want to shout out the Foundation for Financial Planning. I did a workshop for them recently where they encourage and help facilitate pro bono financial planning with the CFP. So there are planners who will see you if you don't meet those income and asset requirements that most planners will
Love
look for.
that.
But I think
That's good to know.
yeah, it's important to be able to share that because that expertise is invaluable. From what I've heard, just kind of being in the space and dealing with the planner population, there are planners who are kind of shifting their approach to what their fee schedule looks like, where maybe they have a subscription based program where you're paying monthly, or they want to incorporate more coaching, or they want to incorporate more financial psychology, financial counseling discipline into their work so they can see a greater audience. Because there are people on the other side of what that income and asset spectrum look like who can use and benefit from the expertise and education that planner has.
This is off topic, but when you go back to listen to like old podcasts, like, do you cringe?
I do. I cringe at old podcasts. I even cringe sometimes at some of the newer podcasts. I'm very self-critical when it comes to how I deliver my thought leadership on certain topics. I'm like, I could have said that a little differently, or
It's okay.
just rephrase that. But all in all, I view it as a learning opportunity. I've certainly built on ideas based off of the reviewing of interviews that I've done in the past. I listen to every single podcast that I am a guest on, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I really like that idea, or I don't know where that came from, but that sounded really good. I'm gonna make some content off of that because a lot of my responses, they're not like pre-planned responses; they're in the moment reflections. But and usually it's when I say, oh, that's a really good question, which I've said a couple of times here. I'm thinking like immediately in that moment, how do I want to respond to this in a way that's responsible, personal, in a way that's accurate, and in a way that's insightful, right? I try very hard to not use complicated jargon in articulating some of these ideas so that people who have never heard of me, who have never heard of financial therapy, or the work that I do, can get something from it, even if they've never worked in financial services or they don't have that background. So my goal is to try to deliver these concepts in as simple a way as possible, while also being very engaging, right? I don't want to be boring. Maybe people fall asleep while they're listening to me. So
Definitely not boring. It's a great conversation.
Thank you.
How long have you been doing it?
Have I been doing what?
Personal finance in general.
I mean, I can answer that question a couple of different ways. My consciousness on financial products and services started when I worked in banking, right? So that's
Mhm.
over a decade. In terms of personal branding and just kind of talking about it very publicly, I would say 2019 was when I started, so 5 years.
Okay.
And just kind of sharing very generously through my book and publications, podcasts, just getting out there. But yeah, it's it's been an interesting journey. So we'll say between 5 and 10 years plus.
Okay. And looking at your shirt, you're successfully
Yeah, so
unemployed.
this is not my brand. Actually, so funny enough,
We have the same one
No, we have
oh,
it.
okay, yeah.
from PinCon, yeah.
Future
I
goal,
walked
future goal
by
for
Justin's
us.
table and I was like, yeah, that's really dope. But it was dope to me because I quit my job in May of 2021. And I'm like,
Yes,
oh yeah,
nice.
this speaks to my experience, right? I'm a successfully unemployed person. But yeah, it was a leap off the deep end for sure. And it was to do this work, right? That was my intention when I
Yeah.
left. Some of it was reactionary. The environment that I was in was hostile and toxic to me
Mhm.
building a brand. And I felt like I had to make a choice between, just falling in line or going out and doing my own thing. Fortunately, I've had a pretty successful run over the last going into 4 years now, where I've just been on my own, learning, developing, sharing, growing my audience.
Full-time counselor then?
Full time,
Nice.
all of it. Content creator, financial
Nice.
counselor, financial therapist.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask, what's
Congratulations.
the name of your book?
Financially Irresponsible is definitely my flagship product, but I have 5 book projects that I've been a part of. I
Wow.
don't intend on slowing down, so you
Okay.
might see a book 6 or 7 or 8 in the next couple of years. But I really pour a lot of my own personal experiences and perspectives at that particular stage of my development into Financially Irresponsible. And like I said, I was published in 2019, so just to your question, as far as cringing when I look back at some of the podcasts, I also cringe when I look back at that book and I'm like, what was I even talking about there? But there's still
You had to start
But it's
somewhere.
exactly.
progress.
You had to start somewhere. So
It's progress.
and I can always go back and revise and re-release. So that's on the roadmap at some
Yes.
point. But writing a book
There
is an endeavor. So
Mhm.
I'm not focused on that right now, but it is part of my plan to re-release.
Yeah. Wow, that's
That's awesome.
remarkable. Amazing success.
Mhm.
Yeah. Congratulations, like Jess mentioned. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So before we go, we have one last
Sure.
question. What is the single most important piece of financial wisdom you would like to leave to our audience? Though you just gave us so much information.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wow, sorting through all of that. I think coming back to the question that you asked as a coach, but spending that for individuals who are receiving coaching or receiving any kind of guidance, whether that be subscribing to their favorite influencers, Instagram or TikTok page, or working with a financial professional. I think it's super important to get a grip of what your values and what your goals are, and understand that they're going to be unique to you, that they don't have to look like the person next to you, that there's so many points of intersection in our experiences as individuals, right? I talked about religion, I talked about work culture, I talked about family culture, ethnicity, just there's so many variables, language,
Mhm.
that are going to kind of influence and sway what is important to you as an individual. And that's okay, right? Those are things that make you you. Those are things that you should and could celebrate, but also recognize that while many of times the values that we have are values that are inherited, you are in a position of power in redefining what those values are, right? So if the value no longer serves you, you can change that. And when you do
Mhm.
change that, you want to set and establish goals financially or otherwise, right? Lifestyle goals that are aligned to those values. so that you have this really positive feedback loop saying, okay, this is what's important to me, and these are the things that I'm going to work on to make sure that I accomplish this thing that's important to me. For some people, that looks like becoming a millionaire. For some people, that looks like building a really strong community network and being able to be philanthropic. For some people, I have a really good friend, one of my best friends. He's like, I'm not interested in being a millionaire. He's like a hardcore socialist. He's like, I want to start a business where I'm profit sharing with everybody, even down to the janitor. And I think that's super noble work and a noble position that he has in wanting to share the benefit of everybody's labor with everybody, regardless of what their position in the organization. But I want to be a millionaire, right? So we have conversations about that. We're like, why do you want to be a millionaire? Is a millionaire enough money? Is a millionaire is it ever enough, right? But our experiences are different, and we can respect those experiences while also acknowledging that on the path to accomplishing what it is that we both individually want to accomplish, there are foundational behaviors financially in the relationship that we have with money that we need to exhibit. That include not overly abusing debt, right? Making sure that we're paying ourselves first, making sure that we're able to secure an income so that we can do the things that we want to do, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my biggest takeaway for anybody that's listening. Definitely take inventory and audit your financial goals with the value system that you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahkim. We really appreciate you being on our podcast, and we hope to have you back sometime soon because this was a great conversation. We'd love to hear more about this and connect with you at another time.
Can you share where people can find you?
Yes. Thank you for asking. So I am active on also. Well, let me rephrase that. That was a automated response that I usually give when I do these. I have been less active on social media, but certainly I'm present there. So all my social media is at my name: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. It's all Rahkim Sabree. My website is rahkimsabree.com. I am the most active on my Substack newsletter, so that's rahkimsabree.substack.com. And that newsletter is called Overcoming Financial Trauma. So you can get insights from me direct to your inbox if you subscribe. I have a column of Forbes, so go to Forbes.com/sites/Rahkim3, or just type in my name in the search. You'll see some of the articles that I've written there. But yeah, I'm very easily accessible. Just Rahkim Sabree wherever you're looking for me. I'm probably there.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yes. All right. Well, that's all we have for Financial Progress. Until next time, we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.